You know, usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of just absolute precision.
Oh, totally. It feels like engineering.
Right. Like you fall off a bike, you break your arm, the X-ray shows that that jagged white line on the black film, and the doctor just points at it with a pen and says, "There it is. That's the problem."
Yeah, it's binary. The bone is broken or the bone is intact.
Yeah.
And, the clarity there is incredibly comforting because it allows us to just immediately categorize the issue and apply a standardized fix. We
Exactly.
desperately want the world to work like that X-ray machine.
We really do, but the moment you step out of the hospital and into, the realm of human behavior or leadership
Oh, yeah.
or corporate maneuvering and political power dynamics, suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless. You are looking at a landscape that is just murky and subjective and intensely psychological. And when you wade into those waters to talk about the acquisition and the maintenance of power, there is really one name that immediately conjures up the darkest, most cynical depths imaginable.
Machiavellian.
Machiavellian,
It's
yes.
basically become the ultimate pejorative in our vocabulary.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the moment you label someone in your office or like in a political campaign as Machiavellian, you are painting a very specific picture.
You're thinking of backstabbing.
Right,
Mhm.
backstabbing, ruthless manipulation, uh, a villain whispering in the shadows. It represents pure, unadulterated self-interest, stripped of any moral framework whatsoever.
Which is exactly why we are doing this deep dive into the actual source text today. We are taking a massive, incredibly detailed historical and biographical look at Niccolò Machiavelli and his infamous masterwork, The Prince.
It's so needed, honestly.
Yeah, the mission here for you, the listener, is to strip away that cartoonish, mustache twirling caricature that the word has become over the last 500 years.
We really want to decode the raw, unfiltered mechanics of power that he actually wrote down.
Right, and because his examples are deeply rooted in 16th century Italian wars and forgotten monarchs, our goal today is to translate that Renaissance strategy into the modern reality you experience every single day.
Because it is surprisingly relevant.
It really is. We want to understand the foundational logic of power structures, whether you're looking at a hostile corporate takeover, a massive political shift, or just, the ruthless maneuvering happening right now in your mid-level management meeting.
Yeah, and to really grasp the gravity of this text,
Yeah.
you can't just read the words on the page. You have to understand the crucible in which it was forged.
The historical context is wild.
It's insane. We need to travel back to Florence in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. And this was not the serene, romanticized vision of the Renaissance we see in art museums today.
No, not at all.
It was a terrifying, volatile powder keg.
Yeah.
I mean, Florence was a city caught in a perpetual, violent tug of war.
It seems like, what, every 5 minutes the entire power structure of the city was just turned upside down?
Basically, yeah.
You have the Medici family, these staggeringly wealthy bankers who essentially operated as the unofficial royalty of the city.
Right, they ran everything behind the scenes.
And then you have radical religious uprisings, like Girolamo Savonarola, the friar who literally takes over the government.
Oh, the bonfire of the vanities.
Yes, he starts burning books, art, luxury goods in the streets. Then the Republic is restored. It's just chaos.
Complete chaos. And the Italian peninsula wasn't even a unified country back then.
Yeah.
It was this fragmented collection of warring city-states.
Just constantly making and breaking alliances.
Exactly. And constantly being invaded by massive foreign superpowers like France and Spain. And right in the middle of this existential meat grinder is Niccolò Machiavelli.
And he wasn't just some philosopher sitting in an ivory tower dreaming up theoretical utopias, right?
No, not at all. He was a practitioner. For 14 years, while Florence was operating as a republic, he served as a senior diplomat. He was the secretary of the Second Chancery.
Which basically means he was the guy the government sent into the room with the most dangerous men on the planet to somehow keep Florence from being destroyed.
Exactly. He was crossing the Alps on horseback to negotiate with King Louis XII of France. He was navigating the treacherous court of the Pope in Rome.
Dealing with the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany.
Yeah. For over a decade, Machiavelli was essentially a fly on the wall, meticulously observing how the apex predators of European politics actually behaved when the doors were closed and the pleasantries were dropped.
He watched kings make promises they fully intended to break.
And he watched popes orchestrate military campaigns. He had a front row seat to the reality of power.
But the music completely stops for him in the year 1512. The Republic of Florence collapses.
It all comes crashing down.
The Medici family, who had been exiled, decide they want their city back. And they don't just ask nicely, do they?
No, they march back in, backed by a terrifying Spanish army and the support of the Pope.
Wow.
The Republic falls, the Medici take over, and Machiavelli's life is instantly pulverized.
Because he represents the old regime.
Right. So he is immediately fired from his prestigious position. And shortly after that, a conspiracy against the new Medici rulers is uncovered, and Machiavelli's name is found on a piece of paper belonging to the conspirators.
Which is just a death sentence back then.
Pretty much. He is arrested, thrown into the Bargello prison, and subjected to a horrific form of torture known as the strappato.
And the mechanics of the strappato are just brutal.
They are awful.
They tie your hands behind your back, attach a rope to your wrists, hoist you high up into the air by a pulley, and then drop you.
Stopping the rope just before you hit the ground.
Right, so the kinetic force violently dislocates the shoulders and tears the muscles, and they did this to him repeatedly.
He endured it, though. He never confessed to the conspiracy, likely, because he was genuinely innocent of it, actually.
That's incredible willpower.
Yeah. And eventually, due to a general amnesty celebrating the election of a new Medici pope, he was released. But he was totally ruined.
He was heavily fined, stripped of all his rank, and banished from the city of Florence.
Forced into exile at a small, dusty, really impoverished family farm in the countryside of San Casciano.
He goes from dining with the King of France to being a disgraced, physically broken, unemployed guy just staring at the mud in the country.
It's a massive psychological blow.
And this profound isolation is what births the prince in 1513. When you look at the context of his life, this book is not some abstract theoretical treatise.
Not at all.
It is the most intense, desperate job application in human history.
That is the perfect way to describe it. He explicitly dedicates the book to Lorenzo de' Medici, the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent.
The current head of the very family that just dismantled his life, fired him, and tortured him.
He is swallowing every single ounce of his pride.
He's putting this portfolio on Lorenzo's desk, essentially saying, look, I know your administration just broke my arms, but I have 14 years of unparalleled experience observing the mechanics of human domination.
I know how the French operate. I know how the Pope thinks.
Right. Here is the ultimate playbook on how to maintain the throne you just took. Read this, see my value, and please just hire me back.
And the physical act of him writing this book is actually documented in a letter he wrote to his friend Francesco Vettori. It provides this haunting window into his psychological state.
What does he say in the letter?
Well, Machiavelli describes his daily routine in exile. During the daylight hours, he's trapping birds with his bare hands. He's chopping wood in the forest.
It's menial labor.
Yeah, and he's hanging out at the local grimy tavern, playing cards with the butcher, the miller, and the baker, getting into screaming matches over pennies just to keep his mind active.
Wow.
He is deeply immersed in the mundane, humiliating reality of his new poverty.
But then the sun goes down, and the letter describes this surreal, almost religious evening ritual.
It really is beautiful in a dark way.
He walks back to his farmhouse. He stops at the threshold of his study. He takes off his everyday clothes, the garments covered in mud, sweat, and bird feathers.
And he carefully puts on his official court robes.
Yeah.
The pristine, dignified clothes he used to wear when he was an ambassador representing the Republic.
He physically dresses up to sit completely alone in his room.
Yeah. And he writes that in those garments, he imagines himself stepping back into the ancient courts of the great men of history.
For 4 hours every night.
Right. For 4 hours, he says he feels no boredom, he forgets all his troubles, he no longer fears poverty, and he is not terrified by death.
He engages in imaginary conversations with the ghosts of antiquity. Commanders, emperors, kings. He asks them why they made the strategic decisions they made in their moments of crisis.
And out of those conversations, he distills everything he has learned into the tight, ruthless chapters of The Prince.
The sheer intellectual focus required to pull yourself out of absolute despair and write something so coldly analytical is just staggering.
It is a testament to his intellect.
So let's open this playbook. To understand how a leader holds on to power, Machiavelli says you first have to understand the nature of the terrain you are stepping into.
Exactly. We move from his farmhouse desk to his first major lesson, which is categorizing states.
And if we are looking at this through a modern lens, this entire section reads like a brutal manual on acquisitions and mergers.
It really does. He starts by dividing all states into two main categories: republics, which he acknowledges but explicitly decides not to cover in this particular book,
Right?
and principalities, which are ruled by a single individual, a prince. He then takes principalities and breaks them down further into hereditary and new.
Okay, let's focus on the hereditary states first, because Machiavelli seems to think these are essentially the training wheels of leadership.
Oh, absolutely. Hereditary states are the easiest to hold. The population has been ruled by your specific family for generations. The people are conditioned to your name.
They're used to the brand.
Exactly. They are accustomed to your family's particular way of doing things. You simply inherited the crown from your father.
So what's his advice for ruling those?
Machiavelli's advice here is surprisingly hands-off. He says just don't do anything outrageously stupid to disrupt the traditional customs.
Don't break what's working.
Right. If a crisis arises, just temporize and rely on the inertia of history. He uses the Duke of Ferrara as an example.
What happened with him?
The Duke survived massive, coordinated attacks by powerful enemies like the Venetians and the Pope, not because he was some brilliant military tactician.
But just because of his roots.
Yes, his family had such deep, ancient roots in the region that the local populace had no desire to overthrow the familiar system.
It's the equivalent of inheriting a legacy family business that practically runs on autopilot.
Exactly.
Your grandfather founded it, the supply chain is locked in, the employees have been there for 20 years, and the customer base is just fiercely loyal to the brand name.
Right, the momentum's already there.
So when you take over as CEO, your only real job is to not ruin the secret recipe. You just show up, sign the checks, let the existing managers do their jobs, and the company will survive almost any market fluctuation because of sheer institutional momentum.
That's a perfect analogy. But the real nightmare, however, begins when you step out of that comfort zone.
The new acquisitions.
Machiavelli warns that the true test of a ruler is the mixed principality, or an entirely new one. A mixed principality is when you conquer a brand new territory and attempt to graft it onto your existing state.
And why is that such a nightmare?
Because of a fundamental flaw in human psychology. People willingly, even eagerly, change their rulers, believing that a new boss will improve their lives.
Oh, they think the grass is greener.
Always. They take up arms, they protest, they actively help the invader overthrow the old king.
But the tragedy is that they inevitably realize the new boss is actually worse.
Right. And it's not necessarily because the new ruler is evil, it's a structural inevitability.
Oh.
Well, when you conquer a new state, you burn an occupying army. You have to feed that army, which means you have to impose new taxes.
Huh?
You have to reorganize the local government to favor your loyalists. You end up deeply offending the very people you just conquered.
This translates flawlessly to a corporate hostile takeover.
Tell me how you see it.
Well, you are the ambitious CEO of Company A, and you orchestrate a massive buyout of your rival, Company B. During the acquisition phase, the employees of Company B might actually help you from the inside.
They want the old boss out.
Exactly. They leak information, they complain to the board, they actively undermine their old CEO because they assume you're going to bring in better benefits and a fresh culture.
Right.
But the day the merger goes through, reality hits.
You have to pay for the massive debt you took on to buy the company.
Exactly. So what's the first thing you do? You initiate budget cuts. You freeze promotions. You fire their favorite middle managers and replace them with your own executives from Company A.
And suddenly, the newly acquired employees absolutely despise the new management.
They hate you. And here is the truly Machiavellian trap. You cannot trust the people who helped you overthrow the old CEO.
Why not?
Because they are already disappointed that you didn't give them the massive rewards they felt they deserved for their treason. You were surrounded by enemies on all sides.
That is so true. And Machiavelli actually illustrates this exact trap with the disastrous historical case study of King Louis XII of France.
Right, Louis XII.
Louis decided he wanted to expand his empire by taking over the Italian region of Milan. He marched in, took it over, and then proceeded to lose it almost immediately because he mismanaged the integration so spectacularly.
Machiavelli identifies 5 catastrophic mechanical errors Louis made in this merger. Let's dissect these, because they form a checklist of what not to do when taking over any new territory or organization.
So the first error, Louis destroyed the minor powers in the region.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, there were smaller, weaker city-states around Milan that were terrified of the larger Italian powers. When Louis arrived, they looked to him for protection.
They wanted to be his allies.
Exactly. But instead of bringing them under his wing and using them as loyal local proxies, he crushed them or allowed them to be marginalized. He alienated the exact people who would have been his natural, desperate allies.
He essentially fired the local vendors and suppliers who actually knew the landscape. What was the second error?
He increased the strength of an already major power. Pope Alexander VI was trying to carve out a state for his son in the Romagna region.
Okay.
Louis, hoping to curry favor with the Pope, actually sent French troops to help the Pope's military campaign.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Machiavelli points out the sheer absurdity of this. Louis took a rival who was already powerful and gave him the military muscle to become an existential threat to the French hold on Italy.
You never fund the R&D department of your biggest competitor just because they ask nicely.
Exactly. The third error was bringing a massive foreign power into the region. Louis invited the King of Spain to share control of the Kingdom of Naples in southern Italy.
He thought he was forming a strategic partnership, I bet.
He did. But Machiavelli notes that by doing this, Louis gave everyone in Italy who was unhappy with French rule a massive, incredibly powerful alternative to turn to.
He invited a predator into his own hunting ground.
Yes.
He literally gave his unhappy employees a direct line to a rival recruiter.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
The fourth error was absenteeism. Louis did not go and live in the newly conquered territory of Milan. He stayed in France.
Remote management never works in a crisis.
Right. If a ruler is physically present, they can see problems arising and extinguish them immediately. If they are far away, they only hear about the rebellion when it's too large to stop.
And finally, the fifth error.
He did not establish colonies. Instead, he relied heavily on military garrisons.
This distinction between colonies and garrisons is fascinating and feels incredibly relevant to how organizations expand their footprint today. Unpack the mechanics of why garrisons fail.
So when you conquer a territory, you obviously must maintain physical control. Louis' method was to send armed French troops, garrisons, to occupy the Italian cities.
Makes sense on paper.
But Machiavelli explains that this is a financial black hole. Maintaining a standing army in a foreign land consumes almost all the revenue generated by that new state, rendering the conquest entirely unprofitable.
You're spending all your profits just on security.
Exactly. Furthermore, a military garrison is a constant, suffocating disruption to the daily lives of the entire population.
Right, because soldiers have to be housed, they take over local taverns, they harass the locals, they consume the local food supply.
The friction is endless. The entire population feels the heavy hand of the occupier every single day, which breeds universal resentment.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative, Machiavelli argues, is to establish colonies. You take a relatively small group of your own loyal citizens from France, and you give them land and homes in key strategic locations within the new Italian territory.
But wait, to give your own people land, you have to size it from the locals? Doesn't confiscating people's homes make them furious?
It does, and this is where we hit the bedrock of Machiavelli's cold mathematical logic.
Okay, lay it on me.
Yes, you have to strip the land and houses from some of the locals to give to your settlers. But you only do this to a tiny, fragmented minority of the population. The people you displaced are now impoverished, scattered across the countryside, and completely stripped of their resources. They're too weak and unorganized to ever mount a credible threat against you.
While the remaining 95% of the population?
The remaining 95% of the population are left entirely alone. Their property is safe, so they stay quiet.
They're just glad it wasn't them.
Exactly. They are terrified that if they cause any trouble, or if they speak out against the new regime, they will be the next ones to have their land confiscated and be cast out into poverty.
Wow.
By injuring a very small number of people severely, you secure the obedience of the vast majority through the psychological leverage of fear.
Which brings us to a sentence that might be the most chilling, unvarnished piece of advice in the entire text. It is the golden rule of injury.
Machiavelli writes, men must be either well-treated or crushed.
Well-treated or crushed. There is no middle path.
None.
And when you think about the mechanics of human resentment, this explains why half measures in conflict resolution almost always explode in your face.
Give me an example of what you mean.
Well, imagine a company catches a powerful executive funneling contracts to a friend. The HR department might decide to give them a slap on the wrist.
Right, a warning.
They demote the executive, take away their corner office, and issue a formal warning. They think they've solved the problem humanely.
But according to Machiavelli, they have just created their most dangerous enemy.
Exactly.
If you injure someone slightly, like a demotion, a public embarrassment, or a minor fine, you hurt their pride and ignite their desire for revenge. But crucially, you leave them with enough power, resources, network access, and influence to actually execute that revenge.
That demoted executive will now spend every waking hour in that smaller office, quietly sabotaging projects, leaking proprietary data to competitors, and organizing an internal faction against the CEO.
Because they still have the means to fight back.
Precise.
This is why Machiavelli argues that if you are forced to injure someone, the injury must be of such absolute magnitude that you do not have to fear their revenge.
You have to neutralize them completely.
Exactly. If you are going to remove that executive, you cannot just move them down the hall. You must completely sever them from the ecosystem.
You buy them out, you enforce an ironclad non-compete clause, you revoke all their access instantly, and you salt the earth of their professional network.
You crush their ability to harm you, because relying on their forgiveness is a fatal miscalculation.
So Louis XII fails to crush his enemies, fails to manage his new territory, and loses Milan. But this raises a broader question about the nature of the territories themselves.
What do you mean?
Well, even if a ruler follows all the rules, why are some massive, sprawling empires conquered and held with relative ease, while smaller, seemingly manageable nations are in a state of constant, grinding rebellion?
Yes. Machiavelli moves from the act of acquisition to the internal infrastructure of the power being acquired.
It's a fascinating historical puzzle.
It really is. He looks at Alexander the Great. Alexander marched into Asia and completely dismantled the massive Persian Empire of King Darius.
Huge territory.
Massive. And when Alexander suddenly died, you would expect the vast Persian territories to immediately rise up and overthrow his successors. But they didn't. The Macedonians held the empire quite easily.
Okay, contrast that with the Romans.
Right. The Romans faced endless, bloody, exhausting rebellions when they tried to hold much smaller territories like France, which was Gaul back then, and Spain.
To understand why, Machiavelli says we have to open up the hood and look at the structural wiring of the government. He identifies two distinct models of rule.
Let's categorize them as Model A and Model B. Model A is the Empire of Darius, or the Empire of the Ottoman Turk during Machiavelli's time.
How does that one work?
In this system, there is a single absolute master. The ruler is the undisputed sun around which everything orbits. Every other official in the entire country, the ministers, the governors, the generals, are merely servants.
They're just administrators appointed by the master.
Exactly. They don't have their own base of power. They hold their positions entirely at the master's pleasure.
So the local citizens don't feel a deep blood loyalty to the regional governor.
Right. They know the governor is just a temporary middleman. All ultimate authority flows back to the single master.
Okay, now contrast that with Model B.
Model B is the Kingdom of France during the Renaissance. The King of France sits on the throne, but he is surrounded by an ancient, entrenched class of nobles, the barons.
And these barons are powerful in their own right.
Very. They do not hold their position because the king gave it to them. They hold it through ancient lineage. They have their own castles, their own massive estates, and most importantly, they have their own subjects.
So the peasants living on a baron's land are deeply personally loyal to that specific baron, not to the distant king in Paris.
Exactly. The king relies on the support of these barons to rule, and he cannot simply fire a baron without risking a massive civil war.
This translates so cleanly to technology infrastructure.
Oh, how so?
Think of it for a beginner in tech. Model A, the Empire of Darius, is a centralized cloud server environment.
Okay, I track.
You have one master administrative hub. All the data, all the permissions, all the user access rights are governed by that single core. The individual terminals have no independent processing power. They just connect to the main server.
Right.
But Model B, the French kingdom, is a decentralized network. It's like a blockchain or a massive franchise system where every individual node or franchisee has its own local database, its own localized security protocols, and its own local customer base that doesn't really care about the corporate parent.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Now, apply the mechanics of conquest to those two tech infrastructures. Model A, the centralized server, is incredibly difficult to conquer initially.
Why is that?
Because you cannot easily find a vulnerability on the edges. You can't just bribe a regional governor in the Persian Empire to let your army through, because that governor has no independent authority to bring the local army with him.
Right. The people won't follow a traitorous middleman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, to conquer Model A, You have to gather your forces and smash head-on into the fully unified, concentrated might of the master's entire system. It requires immense strength.
But once you break through that primary firewall and defeat the master,
The entire system becomes yours, and it is effortlessly easy to hold. Once Alexander the Great eliminated Darius on the battlefield, the Persian people had no one else to follow.
there were no independent barons with their own private armies to retreat to their castles and start a guerrilla war.
None. The people were already conditioned to obey a single distant master. Alexander simply stepped over Darius's body, sat in the master's chair, and the entire administrative machine seamlessly began working for him.
Because the wiring of the building only requires one person to flip the main switch.
Precisely.
But Model B, the decentralized network with the French barons, that operates completely in reverse.
It is incredibly easy to conquer. You don't have to fight the whole country at once. You simply probe the network until you find a disgruntled node.
A rogue franchisee.
Exactly. You find an ambitious baron who feels disrespected by the king. You bribe him or promise him more land, and he eagerly opens the gates for your invading army.
And because his local subjects are loyal to him, he brings a portion of the country's strength directly to your side. You can walk right in.
But the morning after you conquer the capital, the nightmare begins.
Because it is structurally impossible to hold.
Right. The very same baron who happily betrayed his king to let you in will betray you the moment he feels you aren't paying him enough attention.
And you cannot possibly satisfy the endless demands of all the different barons who helped you.
Furthermore, you can't simply wipe them all out because they are deeply rooted in the land. So you are constantly putting out fires. You defeat one baron, and another one rises up in a different province.
The lesson here is profound for anyone entering a new leadership role. Before you make a move, before you accept a job as a turnaround CEO or a new department head, you must map the structural wiring of loyalty within that organization.
You have to know what you're stepping into.
Right. If you take over a company built by a domineering founder where all loyalty flows directly to the top, your only real hurdle is replacing the founder. Once they are gone, the staff will follow you.
But if you take over a sprawling corporation where loyalty is fractured among powerful, entrenched middle managers who have built their own little fiefdoms and protected silos,
You aren't taking over a company. You are stepping into a feudal war zone.
you will spend your entire tenure negotiating with your own subordinates just to get basic tasks accomplished. It's a grueling test of leadership.
Which naturally pivots our discussion from the terrain to the leader themselves. We've talked about the state, but how did the prince get the top job in the first place?
Right? The origin story.
Machiavelli dissects the origins of power, dividing the path to the throne into two distinct avenues: merit and fortune.
Let's talk about merit first. He uses the Italian word virtù when discussing merit. And it's vital to understand that Machiavelli is not talking about Christian moral virtue. He is not talking about being kind, patient, or charitable.
It's not about being a good person.
No. Machiavellian virtù is about raw capability. It encompasses ingenuity, relentless drive, martial skill, and the sheer force of will required to bend the world to your desires.
The path of merit is walked by the greatest founders in history. He points to figures like Moses, Cyrus the Great, Romulus, and Theseus.
These are the heavy hitters, the mythological and historical titans who built empires from scratch.
And Machiavelli observes a fascinating common denominator among all of them, right?
He does. Rising to power purely through your own merit is agonizingly difficult. You start with nothing, and you have to fight for every inch of influence. But once you finally reach the summit, maintaining your power is remarkably easy.
Why is it easier for them to hold on than someone who just inherits it?
Because they laid their own foundations. They built the house brick by agonizing brick. They understand the structural integrity of their empire because they mix the mortar themselves.
That makes a lot of sense.
They forged their own loyal armies, established their own laws, and commanded the respect of the people through undeniable capability.
But here is the most insightful part of his analysis on merit. None of that talent matters without a crisis.
He calls it an opportunity.
Opportunity, right.
He argues that all of these great founders required a catastrophic environment to demonstrate their virtue. Moses needed the Israelites to be brutally enslaved in Egypt.
If they were comfortable, they never would have followed a radical leader into the desert.
Exactly. Cyrus needed the Medes to have grown soft and complacent. Romulus needed to be abandoned at birth to become the founder of Rome.
It's the intersection of extreme preparation and a desperate environment. Without the crisis, their immense talent would have simply stagnated.
But without their talent, the crisis would have just resulted in a massacre. A comfortable status quo never produces a visionary founder.
That is the arduous path of merit. But Machiavelli contrasts this with the seductive, perilous path of fortune.
The Renaissance Nepo baby.
Yes. Those who are elevated to power not by their own sweat, but by the sheer luck of circumstance, wealth, or the influence of powerful allies.
And his prime case study for this path, and arguably the central animating figure of the entire book, is Cesare Borgia, also known as Duke Valentino.
Tell us about Borgia.
Borgia did not climb the ladder. He was placed on the roof. He gained his immense power purely through the fortune of his father, who happened to be Pope Alexander VI.
Having the Pope as your dad provides a fairly significant advantage in 16th century Italian politics.
The ultimate unfair advantage. The Pope utilized the vast wealth and military leverage of the Church to carve out an entire state for his son.
But why does Machiavelli find Borgia so utterly fascinating? I mean, if he's just a spoiled kid.
Because Borgia was not a lazy, entitled heir. Borgia recognized the fragility of his position. He knew he was sitting on a throne supported only by the aging heartbeat of his father.
He knew his luck could run out.
He realized, I didn't build this foundation. If the wind blows the wrong way, this whole thing collapses. So Borgia did everything a brilliant leader could do to pour concrete under that throne after he already had the power.
He retroactively tried to build virtue. And this desperation to secure his state leads to what is undeniably one of the most wild, cinematic, and brutally illustrative stories in the entire text.
Oh, absolutely. It is the story of Ramiro d'Orco. This is a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, so Borgia's father acquires a region called the Romagna and hands it to him. But the Romagna is an absolute disaster. For years, it has been ruled by weak, corrupt lords who preferred to rob their subjects rather than govern them.
Total anarchy.
The region is infested with bandits, there is no rule of law, and the citizens are miserable and terrified. Borgia knows that to make this territory profitable and secure, he must establish strict law and order.
But he also knows that establishing order in a lawless land requires extreme, unpalatable violence.
Exactly. If Borgia rides in and starts executing people himself, the citizens will just view him as another cruel tyrant.
Right. He needs the violence, but he cannot afford the hatred that comes with it. So he needs a proxy. He needs a hatchet man.
Precisely. Borgia hires a man named Ramiro d'Orco. Machiavelli describes Ramiro as a swift, notoriously cruel, and highly efficient enforcer.
Okay.
Borgia publicly appoints Ramiro as the governor of the Romagna and grants him absolute, unchecked power to pacify the region.
And Romero does exactly what he was hired to do, right?
Oh, he cracks down with terrifying severity. He executes the bandits, he crushes the corrupt local lords, he uses extreme physical violence to enforce the law, and within a remarkably short period of time, the Romagna is pacified.
The roads are safe, order is restored, the objective is achieved.
Now, Borgia has a massive PR crisis on his hands.
Yeah, because the people of the Romagna finally have peace, but they are deeply traumatized and furious about the horrific cruelty they just endured.
And naturally, they blame the guy at the top. They know Ramiro works for Borgia.
Borgia realizes the mood is shifting toward hatred.
Yes. He has the peaceful province he desired, but the toxicity of Ramiro's methods is threatening to infect Borgia's own reputation. He must physically and psychologically distance himself from the violence he orchestrated.
So what does he do?
He decides to provide the people with a spectacular catharsis. One morning, the citizens of the town of Cesena wake up and walk into the main public piazza.
And what do they find?
There, displayed on the cobblestones, they find Ramiro d'Orco. He's been chopped completely in half. Beside his severed body is a bloody piece of wood and a sharp knife.
He literally chops his own loyal enforcer in half and leaves him in the town square.
Yes.
He throws him under the bus in the most gruesome way imaginable.
Machiavelli's description of the public's reaction is a profound psychological insight. He writes that the ferocity of this spectacle left the people satisfied and stupefied.
Satisfied and stupefied, they got the peace they desperately wanted, and they got to see the monster who hurt them receive ultimate punishment.
Borgia manages to take full credit for the newfound safety of the region, while completely shifting the blame for the necessary cruelty onto the middleman he just executed.
It is breathtakingly cynical. Let's frame this through the lens of modern corporate maneuvering. Because while CEOs aren't using literal knives in the town square, the fundamental dynamic happens constantly.
It's the ultimate restructuring consultant playbook.
Right. Imagine you are the CEO of a legacy company that is bloated, bleeding money, and heading toward bankruptcy. You look at the spreadsheets and you realize that to save the core business, you have to fire 20% of your workforce, slash benefits, and shut down beloved departments.
The nightmare scenario.
But you, the CEO, want to maintain your image as a benevolent, employee-focused leader. If you announce the firings, the remaining staff will despise you, morale will plummet, and your top talent will flee.
So you don't do it yourself. You bring in a notoriously ruthless outside consulting firm, the corporate equivalent of Romero Dorco.
You give the consultants full authority to conduct a massive efficiency audit. They come in wearing expensive suits and they do the brutal, ugly work.
They conduct the impersonal layoff interviews, they cut the budgets.
They act entirely without empathy, and the entire company naturally focuses all of its fear and hatred squarely on these outside consultants.
And once the dirty work is finished, once the payroll is slashed, the company is lean, and the quarterly profits finally spike back into the green.
The CEO steps up to the podium at the all-hands meeting. They act shocked and appalled by the harsh methods the consultants used.
They publicly fire the consulting firm.
Exactly, loudly proclaiming that this is not our culture. They might even rehire a few of the more popular employees to show mercy. The CEO looks like the hero who banished the evil efficiency experts, saving the surviving employees.
Meanwhile, the CEO secretly reaps massive financial bonuses because the company is profitable again.
Satisfied and stupefied. The peace is secured, the blame is outsourced.
It is a dark reality of human organization. But Machiavelli makes a vital, often overlooked distinction in his next section, which we can call the dark arts.
Okay, where does he go with this?
Well, Borgia utilized a proxy for his violence. He maintained a veneer of legitimacy. But what happens if a ruler dispenses with the proxy and utilizes direct, unadulterated wickedness?
Can a leader just be a purely evil monster and still succeed? This is a crucial question because up to this point, Machiavelli seems entirely agnostic about violence as long as it is effective. Does he actually draw a line?
He does, and the distinction he makes is profoundly revealing about his ultimate values.
Oh.
He presents two historical figures who rose to power through sheer sociopathy.
Who are they?
The first is Agathocles of Syracuse. He was a lowly potter's son in ancient times who joined the militia, rose through the ranks, and then one day called a meeting of the city's senators and richest citizens.
And then what?
On his signal, his soldiers simply butchered all of them, and Agathocles declared himself king.
Just a straight-up massacre.
Yeah. The second is Oliverado da Fermo, a man closer to Machiavelli's own time, who was actually raised by his uncle. Oliverado invited his uncle and the leading men of the town to a lavish banquet.
Let me guess.
After dinner, his soldiers burst into the dining hall and slaughtered everyone.
It's the Red Wedding. Just pure, treacherous slaughter of their own guests and family.
Exactly. Now, strictly speaking in terms of acquiring power, both of these men were highly successful. They eliminated their rivals, seized the throne, and ruled for years. They achieved the primary objective.
But Machiavelli stops and delivers a severe judgment, doesn't he?
He does. He writes, and I quote, "It cannot be called talent to slay fellow citizens, to deceive friends, to be without faith, without mercy, without religion. Such methods may gain empire, but not glory."
Such methods may gain empire, but not glory.
Right.
Why does glory matter to a pragmatist like Machiavelli? I mean, if you have the castle and the gold, who cares what people think of your methods?
Because Machiavelli, beneath the cynicism, is a Renaissance humanist. He recognizes that mortal power is fleeting. You will eventually die. The only true immortality available to a human being is how history remembers them.
Glory is the ultimate currency.
Yes. Agathocles and Oliverado were incredibly effective thugs, and they secured their survival, but they will never be celebrated alongside the great state builders like Moses or Cyrus. Pure wickedness gets you the job, but it permanently bars you from the pantheon of greatness.
History remembers them with disgust, not awe.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, Agathocles survived. He ruled for a very long time without being overthrown by his outraged citizens. How is that mechanically possible? If everyone knows you were a treacherous, murderous thug who butchered the Senate, why doesn't the population constantly conspire to assassinate you?
This brings us to a concept that is deeply unsettling but analytically brilliant: the mathematics of cruelty.
Mathematics of cruelty. Okay.
It is about the economy of violence. Machiavelli looks at the data and asks why some cruel rulers enjoy long, stable reigns, while others are immediately assassinated by conspiracies. He concludes that it depends entirely on whether the cruelty is used well or badly.
The idea of cruelty being used well sounds like a grotesque oxymoron. How does he define it?
It is entirely about timing and psychological pacing. The core rule is this: If a ruler must commit injuries to secure his state, he must calculate all the necessary wicked deeds in advance and then execute them all at once,
All at once.
in one swift, concentrated, overwhelming stroke of brutality. Do not drag the violence out over months or years,
Why?
because human psychology can adapt to a single massive shock. If you commit all your cruelties on day one, the population is horrified and traumatized. But then the violence stops. Time passes.
The injuries are tasted less with each passing day.
Exactly. The people mourn, and then they slowly begin to adapt to the new, peaceful normal. They relax.
And what about the opposite? Cruelty used badly.
Cruelty used badly is when a ruler is hesitant. They execute one rival today. 2 months later, they confiscate someone's property. 6 months later, they arrest another critic. The violence increases drop by drop.
Oh, that sounds exhausting.
Under this method, the population can never relax. Every single citizen lives in a constant, agonizing state of suspense, wondering if they are next. And it is that chronic, lingering dread that eventually forces the people to conspire and kill the ruler just to end their own anxiety.
What about the good stuff? How do you handle rewards?
Rewards and benefits must be handled in the exact opposite manner. They should be handed out drop by drop, slowly, over a very long period.
If you give all the rewards out at once, people consume them, feel entitled to them, and quickly forget the generosity.
Exactly. By distributing them slowly, the people are constantly reminded of your value, and they can continuously savor the benefits.
Let's ground this with a visceral analogy. The injuries all at once concept is exactly like removing a medical adhesive bandage from a hairy arm.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
Right. You have two choices. The first choice is to grip the edge and rip it off in one agonizing, blinding fraction of a second. It hurts immensely. You might yell.
But 5 minutes later, the pain is entirely gone.
You've adapted, and you move on with your day. That is doing the cruelty all at once.
The initial shock is high, but the lingering resentment is zero.
The alternative is gripping that same bandage and slowly peeling it off, hair by agonizing hair, millimeter by millimeter, stretching the process out over an entire hour.
That is torture.
The pain is sustained, the anticipation of the next pull is psychological torture, and you begin to deeply hate the person pulling the bandage. That is cruelty drop by drop.
And the benefits drop by drop concept.
It perfectly mirrors corporate compensation strategies. Imagine you get hired, and on January 1st, the company gives you your entire year's salary plus a massive $50,000 cash bonus in one lump sum.
You'd be ecstatic.
You are ecstatic for about a week, but human beings habituate quickly. By July, that money is sitting in a bank account, you consider it your baseline property, and you are actively complaining that the office coffee machine is broken. You feel zero daily gratitude to the company.
Because the benefit was tasted all at once and forgotten.
Exactly. But if that company distributes that same amount of money in steady, reliable, generous paychecks every 2 weeks, it acts as a constant, recurring reinforcement of your dependency and loyalty.
Every other Friday, you get a small dopamine hit that reminds you why you endure the stress of the job.
Benefits drop by drop keep the workforce pacified.
It is a profound, if manipulative, understanding of human attention spans. But psychological manipulation is only half the equation. We must pivot to the physical reality of power.
Machiavelli titles this next major theme, The Foundation of Security.
A prince can be a genius at psychological timing, but if a foreign army marches through the front door, none of it matters. What is the actual physical mechanism that secures a state?
He makes a very stark pronouncement here. He says the main foundations of every state are good laws and good arms, but he immediately subordinates the law to the military.
He states plainly that you cannot have good laws where there are not good arms. It is a harsh dose of realism.
A law, a treaty, a corporate policy, these are just pieces of paper with ink on them.
They hold absolutely no power unless there is a physical enforcement mechanism behind them. Without a reliable military or police force to back it up, a law is merely a suggestion that the wicked will ignore.
Therefore, he advises that a prince must have no other objective, no other thought, and no other study than the art of war.
Even in times of profound peace, the ruler should be out riding, studying the topography of his land, learning where the marshes are, how the mountains rise, and how the valleys open up, so he inherently knows how to defend his territory when the inevitable attack comes.
But the truly fascinating part of this section isn't just the necessity of an army, it's his intense analysis of who exactly is holding the weapons.
Right.
He spends chapters warning rulers against two very specific types of soldiers, mercenaries and auxiliaries. Let's start with mercenaries because his hatred for them is palpable. Why are they so dangerous?
Well, a mercenary is a professional soldier who fights entirely for financial compensation. They have no personal stake in your city. Machiavelli describes them with absolute contempt. He says they are, quote, disunited, ambitious, without discipline, unfaithful, brave among friends, but cowards before enemies. They have no fear of God and no loyalty to men.
Calling a professional soldier a coward seems counterintuitive. I mean, they fight for a living. Why does he say they run from enemies?
It comes down to their incentive structure. A mercenary is a businessman. His capital is his own life and his armor. He wants to collect his monthly stipend, but he fundamentally does not want to die to earn it.
The amount of money you pay a mercenary will never be enough to convince him to willingly lay down his life to protect your city's walls.
Exactly. During Machiavelli's lifetime, the Italian city-states relied almost exclusively on sophisticated mercenary captains called condottieri.
Right, these were essentially private military corporations.
Yes. And Machiavelli argues that this specific reliance on mercenaries is the exact reason Italy was ruined, overrun, and enslaved by the French and Spanish kings who brought their own national armies.
The Italian mercenary system devolved into an elaborate grift, didn't it?
It did. The condottieri captains realized that if they actually killed each other in battle, they were destroying their own industry. So they developed an unwritten gentleman's agreement.
They would march out, maneuver their armies, make a great show of fighting, but they would avoid inflicting casualties.
They would capture enemy soldiers, but then release them without demanding ransom. They fought bloodless wars just to keep the contracts active and the money flowing, while leaving the states that hired them completely defenseless when a real, vicious foreign army arrived.
It's like watching a rigged sports match where both teams agree to just run out the clock so they can both collect the television broadcast revenue, completely ignoring the fans who paid to see a real contest. It's a massive grift.
It was a catastrophic vulnerability. But as much as Machiavelli despises mercenaries, he warns that there is an even deadlier option: auxiliaries.
How can anything be worse than troops who refuse to fight? What's an auxiliary?
An auxiliary is a fully formed, capable military force that you borrow from a powerful ally. For example, the Pope realizes he is losing a war, so he sends a letter to the King of Spain, asking the king to send the Spanish National Army to come rescue him.
Machiavelli says relying on auxiliaries is a fatal, unrecoverable mistake.
Absolutely fatal.
Why? If they are a real army and they actually fight, isn't that better than the mercenaries?
It is worse because of the trap it creates. If you call in an auxiliary army and they lose the battle, you are ruined, because your defense just collapsed and the enemy will sack your city.
Okay, that's bad.
But if the auxiliary army wins the battle and destroys your enemy, you are in an even worse position.
Yeah.
You are now their prisoner.
Because they are already inside your house.
Exactly. You just invited a massive, victorious, highly organized foreign army into your territory. They take orders from a foreign king, not from you.
What is stopping the Spanish commander from looking around at your beautiful, undefended city and deciding, you know what, we aren't going back to Spain, we own this now?
Nothing. You traded a hostile enemy for an overwhelmingly powerful, dangerous friend who can crush you at any moment. To illustrate the danger of relying on someone else's strength, Machiavelli pulls a brilliant analogy from the Bible, the story of David and Goliath.
Unpack how he uses that story, because it's slightly different than the usual underdog lesson.
When the young shepherd David volunteers to fight the giant Philistine champion Goliath, King Saul is worried. So Saul offers David his own royal armor, his shield, and his heavy sword.
David tries to put them on.
But David is a shepherd, not a heavily armored knight. He takes a few steps, feels the weight restricting his movement, and strips the armor off. He tells the king, "I cannot fight in these. They do not fit me. I must use my own weapons."
And he goes out to face the giant with nothing but his own familiar sling and stones. Wait, so King Saul's armor is an auxiliary weapon?
Yes, Machiavelli concludes from this. In short, the arms of others either fall from your back, or they weigh you down, or they bind you fast.
You can never achieve true security relying on the strength of others.
A prince must rely on his own arms, meaning an army composed of his own citizens, his own loyal subjects, whose very survival is intimately tied to the survival of the state.
Let's translate this into a modern business scenario for a beginner.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you are the founder of a promising tech startup. You have a vision for a revolutionary software product. But instead of hiring internal engineers, you decide to build your entire core algorithm using freelance contractors you found on a gig website.
Those are your mercenaries.
Exactly. They don't care about your company's mission to change the world. They care about their hourly rate. The second a massive tech giant offers them $5 more an hour, they will abandon your project halfway through, and you have no leverage to stop them.
A painful reality for many startups. And the auxiliaries.
The auxiliaries would be like realizing you are behind schedule, so you approach a massive competitor, let's say Google or Amazon, and you ask to borrow their proprietary engineering team and build your product on their deeply integrated, closed ecosystem platform to get it done faster.
No, that's risky.
If Google's team fails to build it, your startup is dead. But if Google's team succeeds and builds a billion-dollar product using their own tools, Google is simply going to look at the contract, alter the API terms of service, and say, thanks for the proof of concept. We are absorbing this feature into our own suite. We own this now.
You are a prisoner to the platform that saved you.
That is exactly it.
That is a flawless modern equivalent.
Yeah.
The lesson is undeniable. You need loyal in-house employees. You need people who hold equity in your company, who believe in the cultural mission, and who know that if the company fails, they lose their livelihood too. That alignment of survival is your own army.
So we have secured the borders with our own loyal troops, but physical force only goes so far. Eventually, the prince has to secure the minds of his people.
The PR machine.
This brings us to what is undoubtedly the most famous, controversial, and widely quoted part of The Prince. How does a leader manage their public perception? Machiavelli starts with a dilemma that seems completely counterintuitive. He discusses the concept of liberality, which means generosity, and he claims it is actually a trap.
It is a huge trap.
He says it is better for a leader to be viewed by the public as a stingy cheapskate than as a generous benefactor. How does that make any sense? Don't people inherently love a generous boss?
They absolutely do, initially. But Machiavelli maps out the long-term structural consequences of that desire to be loved. Let's say a new prince wants to cultivate a reputation for incredible generosity.
Right.
To earn that reputation, he must be seen doing generous things. He throws lavish public festivals, he builds magnificent monuments, he hands out massive bonuses to his courtiers.
Sounds like a great place to live.
It is, until the treasury runs dry, because lavish spending is unsustainable. Eventually, the prince runs out of his own money. But he is now trapped by his own reputation. If he stops the parties, the people will turn on him and call him greedy.
So what does he do?
To maintain the facade of generosity, he is forced to find new revenue. He begins to squeeze his subjects. He raises taxes exponentially. He extorts wealthy merchants. He drains the economic lifeblood of the state just to fund his performative generosity.
Suddenly, the very people he was trying to impress grow to deeply resent and hate him because he is taxing them into poverty.
It's essentially a political Ponzi scheme.
You are robbing the masses to pay for a PR campaign.
Precisely. Therefore, Machiavelli argues, a wise ruler should lean into being perceived as stingy or parsimonious right from the beginning.
Yes, the courtiers will grumble that he doesn't throw good parties.
But a stingy prince saves his money. He builds a massive reserve in the treasury. When a genuine crisis hits, a famine or a foreign invasion, he has the funds to defend the state and feed the people without having to suddenly raise taxes on the commoners.
Ultimately, the vast majority of the population benefits from his stinginess because he isn't constantly reaching into their pockets. True generosity is not robbing your subjects.
It's fiscal responsibility disguised as being a miser.
Which leads us directly into the most eternal question posed in the book. Is it better to be loved or feared?
Machiavelli begins by stating that, ideally, a ruler should strive to be both. But he acknowledges that human nature makes it nearly impossible to perfectly blend the two.
So if a leader is forced to choose, if they can only rely on one emotion to secure their position, it is overwhelmingly safer to be feared than loved.
That's his conclusion.
It's such a dark conclusion. Why does he believe love is so structurally weak?
Because of his profoundly cynical, observant view of human behavior. He argues that men are, by their very nature, ungrateful, fickle, cowardly, and driven by self-interest.
Love is merely a bond of obligation. It is a feeling.
And because human beings are fundamentally selfish, they will break that bond of love the exact moment it benefits them financially or politically to do so. If an employee loves you as a manager, but betraying you to a rival firm gets them a massive promotion and $1 million payout, their love will evaporate.
Love cannot compete with self-interest.
But fear operates differently.
How so?
Fear operates on the deepest, most primal level of survival. Fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never fails. An ambitious courtier might desperately want to betray you for $1,000,000, but if he is absolutely terrified that you will uncover the plot and execute him and ruin his family.
That visceral fear of consequences will override his greed.
Exactly. Fear is a reliable, unbreakable leash. Love is a fragile, conditional thread.
But Machiavelli includes a massive, vital caveat to this rule, right? It's what we can call the property rule. He wants you to be feared, but he insists that you must avoid being hated. Being hated is fatal. How do you ride that line? How can a leader be terrifying without crossing over into generating hatred?
It is actually surprisingly simple in its execution. He says a prince avoids hatred by keeping his hands off two things: the citizens' property and their women.
That's the boundary.
That is the boundary. You can execute someone for committing treason, and the public will accept it. They will fear your swift justice. But if you execute that traitor, and then you arbitrarily seize his family's ancestral farm and give it to one of your political cronies, the public will hate you forever.
Because you violated the sanctity of their personal livelihood.
Machiavelli delivers what is perhaps the most biting, darkly humorous, and penetrating quote in the entire book right here. He writes, "Men forget the death of their father faster than the loss of their patrimony."
Wow. People will forgive you for executing their dad quicker than they will forgive you for stealing their inheritance.
It is so bleak.
But mechanically, you can see the logic. If you kill the father, the event is tragic, but it is over. The father is gone, the mourning eventually fades. But if you steal the family estate, the son wakes up every single morning in a smaller house, eating worse food, and is reminded of his poverty and your transgression every single day for the rest of his life.
Exactly. Hatred is born from ongoing deprivation and the violation of personal sanctuary. Fear is merely a healthy, necessary respect for severe consequences. As long as you respect the property of the masses, they will tolerate and even respect your terrifying capacity for violence against the wicked.
Okay, this brings us to what is probably the most iconic visual metaphor in the entire text. The dual nature of the prince. The lion and the fox set the stage for this.
Machiavelli explains that there are two distinct ways of fighting in the world: by law and by force. Fighting by the law is the way of human beings. It is civilized, it relies on courts, treaties, and debate.
Right.
Fighting by force is the way of beasts. It is raw, physical domination. But because the laws of men are often entirely insufficient, and because wicked men will constantly break the law to defeat you, a successful prince must know how to tap into the nature of the beast.
And among the beasts, he must consciously choose to embody two specific animals: the fox and the lion.
Why those two specifically? Why not a bear or an eagle?
Well, because they represent complementary survival skills. The lion is a creature of immense, terrifying physical strength. It can easily maul its enemies, but the lion lacks cunning. It is easily caught in hidden traps set by poachers because it simply charges straight ahead.
The fox, on the other hand, is incredibly cunning. He can spot a trap hidden in the brush from a mile away. But the fox is physically small and weak. It cannot defend itself in a direct fight against a pack of wolves.
Therefore, Machiavelli argues, a prince must be a fox to recognize the hidden traps and a lion to fight off the wolves.
If you only use brute force, if you are just a lion, you will eventually be outsmarted and trapped by a clever enemy.
And this dual nature directly informs his deeply controversial advice on keeping promises.
He states that a prudent ruler cannot and must not honor his word when doing so places him at a severe disadvantage, and when the original reasons for making the promise no longer exist.
Wait, he is openly advising leaders to break their contracts.
He is. This is the ultimate manifestation of the fox. He argues that if all men were perfectly good, this advice would be wicked. But because men are treacherous and will absolutely break their promises to you, you are not bound to keep your promises to them.
He points to Pope Alexander VI, Caesar Borgia's father, as the ultimate master of this.
Machiavelli says Alexander never did anything in his entire life but deceive men. He made endless promises, swore great oaths, and broke them immediately when it suited him. Yet his schemes always succeeded perfectly because he understood this gullible, hopeful side of human nature.
Let's frame the lion and the fox through a modern corporate lens. Think of a massive, high-stakes corporate contract negotiation between two rival tech giants. The Fox is the team of brilliant, ruthless corporate lawyers. They are scouring the fine print of the contract, finding the hidden loopholes, discovering the subtle traps the other side tried to bury in the addendums, and secretly inserting their own subtle exit clauses.
They represent the cunning required to avoid the trap.
Yes, the Fox navigates the legal deception.
But the lawyers are entirely useless on their own if the other side decides to just illegally ignore the contract. That is where the lion comes in.
The lion is the sheer, overwhelming financial muscle of the corporation. It's the multi-billion-dollar war chest that allows the CEO to look across the table and say, if you violate the spirit of this agreement, we won't just sue you. We will tie you up in expensive litigation for a decade until your entire company bleeds out into bankruptcy.
You need both to survive at the highest level. The brains to see the hidden trap and the brawn to completely smash the existential threat.
And Machiavelli adds a terrifying codicil to this discussion of the PR machine. He says that the prince doesn't actually need to possess all the traditional good qualities: mercy, faith, honesty, humanity, and religion.
In fact, genuinely having them and always strictly practicing them is a liability. It will get you killed.
But it is absolutely essential to appear to have them. He places special emphasis on religion. He stresses that appearing pious and religious is the most important optical illusion of all, because the masses judge entirely by what they see on the surface, not by the hidden reality.
He literally writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are." That is a staggering insight into the nature of public relations.
That sentence applies to heavily curated corporate PR feeds and social media today just as accurately as it applied to Renaissance Florence.
The manipulation of perception is the ultimate shield.
Okay, so we have theoretically constructed the ultimate invincible prince. He has acquired his state efficiently. He understands the internal infrastructure of his barons. He has his own loyal in-house army. He's feared but not hated. He is a cunning fox and a terrifying lion. He controls the narrative.
But what happens when the universe just throws a wrench in the gears?
What happens when random chance strikes? This brings us to the final major theme: navigating the raging river, which is his treatise on fortune and fate.
This is a profoundly philosophical shift in the book. During Machiavelli's time, there was a deeply entrenched, almost fatalistic belief that God and fate controlled the affairs of the world entirely.
The attitude was, if God decides everything, human prudence is useless, so why bother sweating over strategy? Just let things happen.
Machiavelli vehemently refuses to accept this passivity. He refuses to believe that human beings have no agency. He strikes a pragmatic compromise. He estimates that fortune, the unpredictable chaos of the universe, controls roughly 50% of our actions. But it leaves the other 50% to our own free will, to our virtue.
And to illustrate how this 50-50 split actually works in practice, he uses this brilliant, evocative metaphor of a raging river. Walk us through this.
He says that fortune is like a torrential, flooded river. When a massive storm hits and the river overflows its banks, it is an unstoppable force of nature. It uproots massive trees, ruins buildings, and washes away the earth. Everyone flees before it. You cannot stand in front of a raging flood and try to fight it. You will be destroyed.
It is the equivalent of an unforeseeable market crash, a global pandemic, or a sudden, massive technological shift. It is an act of God that you cannot control in the moment.
Exactly. However, Machiavelli says, just because the flood is utterly unstoppable when it happens, that does not mean men are powerless in the long periods of peacetime.
When the weather is calm and the river is quiet, men have the agency to act.
They can build strong dams, construct high dikes, and dig deep diversion canals, so that when the flood inevitably comes again, because fortune is cyclical, the raging water is channeled, its force is managed, and its destructive power is mitigated.
The flood becomes an expensive inconvenience rather than an existential disaster.
The preparation during the calm is the 50% you control. The disaster is the 50% you don't.
Precisely. And he adds another crucial layer to surviving the chaos of fortune: adaptability. He argues that a leader's success depends entirely on adapting their personal nature to the shifting times.
If you are a naturally cautious, methodical person, and you happen to lead during an era that requires caution and patience, you will be wildly successful. But if the geopolitical climate suddenly changes and the new era requires bold, rapid, aggressive action, if you remain rigidly cautious, you will be ruined.
So the ultimate survival skill is the ability to pivot your own personality.
Yes. He uses Pope Julius II as his prime example. Pope Julius was notoriously aggressive, impetuous, and impatient. He launched military campaigns with reckless speed. But it just so happened that the specific years he was pope were chaotic times that perfectly rewarded rapid, aggressive behavior.
So Julius was wildly successful, expanding the church's power immensely.
But Machiavelli notes that if Julius had lived longer, and the times had shifted to require careful diplomatic caution, Julius would have destroyed everything, because he was psychologically incapable of changing his fundamental aggressive nature.
Which reinforces exactly why the ideal prince has to be the fox, Andy the lion. You cannot be rigidly locked into one mode of behavior. Now, I have to pause here and ask about the end of this chapter, because Machiavelli uses a very dated, jarring metaphor. He says that fortune is a woman who favors the bold and violent.
Obviously sounds incredibly offensive to modern ears.
How do we contextualize this within the broader strategic lesson he is trying to impart?
It is absolutely jarring, and it is a stark reminder that we are reading a document produced by a highly patriarchal, martial 16th century society. The phrasing is uncomfortable. But if we look past the offensive Renaissance packaging to the fundamental strategic core of what he is arguing, it is a variation of the ancient proverb, fortune favors the bold.
Machiavelli is arguing that in the face of the unpredictable, chaotic forces of the universe, passivity, hesitation, and overcaution are death sentences for a leader. When a crisis hits, sitting back and hoping for the best is a guaranteed way to lose power.
He believes that aggressive, decisive, imposing action, even if it is risky, is far more likely to yield positive results and force circumstances to bend to your will. You have to attempt to dominate the chaos rather than letting the chaos dominate you.
So strategically speaking, he is demanding aggressive agency over passive victimhood, which makes sense in the context of survival. And this actually flows seamlessly into the final section of the book, our outro.
We have spent this entire deep dive decoding a dark, calculating, almost clinical playbook for ruthless ambition. But the very last chapter of the book, chapter 26, features a massive, unexpected shift in tone.
It does. After 25 chapters of cold, detached, almost sociopathic analysis of power mechanics, Machiavelli suddenly drops the clinical mask. The final chapter is a soaring, passionate, emotional call to action. He addresses the Medici family directly.
He pleads with them to step up and act as the new prince. He begs them to utilize all the ruthless methods, the foxes, the lions, the citizen armies he just outlined, to finally liberate a beaten, ruined, bleeding Italy from the barbarian foreign powers, specifically the French and the Spanish invaders.
It fundamentally reframes how you view the author. It reveals his underlying, driving motivation. He wasn't just writing this manual because he enjoyed the concept of evil. He was a patriot.
He looked around at his homeland, saw it being treated like a disposable chessboard by massive foreign kings, and he realized with bitter clarity that the nice, moral, hesitant leaders were getting their citizens slaughtered.
He believed that Italy desperately needed a monster to save it from the other monsters.
Exactly. For Machiavelli, the ultimate end, the liberation, security, and unification of his homeland, justified whatever terrible, bloody means were necessary to achieve it. He wanted a savior who was willing to damn his own soul to save the state.
It is a staggering conclusion. So let's take a breath and summarize the journey we have been on today. We have decoded the ultimate, unfiltered playbook for navigating the realities of power.
We have learned that you must strictly adapt your strategy to the specific structural terrain of the organization you are acquiring.
We learned the mathematical economy of violence. If you must do hard, cruel things, execute them all at once to minimize chronic fear, but hand out rewards drop by drop to ensure ongoing loyalty.
We learned the fatal danger of relying on borrowed power, the mercenaries and auxiliaries, and the absolute necessity of building your own aligned in-house team.
And we learn the delicate, deceptive art of managing public perception, to be the cunning fox who sees the contractual traps and the terrifying lion who scares away the wolves.
To balance the utility of fear without ever crossing the dangerous line into violating property and generating hatred.
And above all, to build your dikes in peacetime so you can survive the raging river of unpredictable fortune.
It is a profound, unsettling, and undeniably brilliant look at the mechanics of human organization.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something we haven't touched on yet, but which completely flips the script on this entire book. Think about the language this book was written in. If Machiavelli truly wanted to write a secret, highly classified, ruthless playbook exclusively for tyrants, princes, and the elite, why did he write it in Italian?
That is the ultimate historical paradox.
During the Renaissance, Latin was the exclusive language of the educated elite, the courts, the church, and serious political philosophy. If you were writing a secret manual for the Medici, you wrote it in Latin. But Machiavelli didn't. He wrote The Prince in the vernacular.
He wrote it in the everyday Italian language of the common people in the streets.
Is it possible that this infamous book was never actually meant to teach tyrants how to rule? Is it possible that Machiavelli, the disgraced Republican, wrote it in the language of the masses to teach the common people exactly how tyrants operate?
A manual not of instruction, but of exposure.
Exactly. He wanted the butcher and the baker at the tavern to be able to read it. He wanted the people to see the man behind the curtain. To understand that the generous festival is just a PR trap, that the external consultant is just a scapegoat for the CEO's cruelty. Was the ultimate manual for dictators actually intended to be a warning flare for the masses to finally see through the deception?
It forces you to question everything about his intent.
Something to think about the next time a politician gives a speech or a CEO announces a corporate restructuring. Ask yourself, are you looking at the fox or are you looking at the lion? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the truly murky waters of power and strategy.
It has been an absolute pleasure pulling these concepts apart.
Until next time, remember to keep your friends close, keep your dikes fortified, and maybe keep your restructuring consultants even closer. See you next time.